Hey folks, this is Tron Games and welcome to Total War Warhammer 3. Today we're going to do kind of a getting started guide for the Skaven faction Throt the Unclean, and this is filmed in Immortal Empires, and so we'll start with just looking at the overall faction, its different effects. We've got basically this food kind of mechanic up here, and you can see basically the more food that you have, the more growth, control, leadership you get, when that's kind of common for the Skaven. If you go lower and you have a shortage of food, recorded by this number here, you actually get penalized. And specifically when you go up, you can see you just get growth, control, leadership, but when you go down, you actually end up having to pay more for buildings, and you actually start to lose loot and it reduces your income basically from doing things. So maintaining good and adequate food supplies is really important for Skaven factions just in general. Then you have this is a mechanic specifically for Throt, which is called the growth vat, and he basically earns a special a special juice that they call growth juice from doing different things. And so as you go, you can kind of get additional units through that, and we'll look at that in a second. And then you get something called mutagen as well. So those are kind of two specific things for Throt's faction. In terms of him himself, he gets access to the Flesh Laboratory, which we'll look at there. He gets increased hit points, and it reduces the construction costs for basically buildings that you can recruit monsters from. So pretty good in that respect. The one mechanic that we probably won't touch on with the Skaven is undercities. You're able to establish undercities in different kind of zones. So we'll just get started here with Throt's army, and we're gonna go fight with these guys. So major Skaven kind of mechanic to be aware of is you can add menace below. This allows you to summon units of clan rats. You can do this in manual, and as you increase, you can get up to 5 uses of it, but it costs you a decent amount of food. And so, remembering we want to maintain a certain amount, it's good for us to do that. So, auto resolve this. Again, if you fight it manually, you'll probably do a little bit better. But when you do, you get the option for treasury. You can replenish your army, or you can enslave and increase your food. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to take the increased replenishment, even though I normally might take the increased food. Pretty much all of these options in the early game are fairly reasonable. I'm going to take that option specifically because eventually I want to take this one, and I don't want to fight that battle manually. So if we go take a look at Throt himself, okay, he gets the Lord of the Hell Pit trait. He has basically the ability to regenerate. He's got a couple of other passive abilities there as well. Master Controller, Beast Pack. Basically gives bonuses and reduced upkeep to kind of abomination units or monster units. And so typically for his armies, kind of storing them up with or filling them up with monsters is a really good idea. This is also extremely good for the Skaven faction. When you fight initial battles, you have a chance to ambush the armies. So just be aware of that. If we go to this guy here as well, we want him to stimulate just a little bit of growth. And I'm going to, well, you can see, trying to recruit here, we can't do that because we're outside of our zone. So I'm just going to poke back over here to get a little bit more replenishment, and we're going to start to recruit some units. So one thing that new players often make a mistake with is they often start recruiting these kind of clan rat spear guys, and they are pretty expensive, and if you look at their stats, they're really not that much different than some of these other units. Usually it's really good to kind of pin units in place with the Skaven, and then use your missile units or later on artillery to kill everything. So I'm just going to get a bunch of these because I just want to fill this army up quickly with units. So here, we want to upgrade the Hell Pit. It's a really good thing to do on the first turn. Now you also can get this right off the bat, and you want to build this when you get up to level 2. But one of the things that is really good with the Skaven is to build either the kind of growth building right away, or to build this, because if you go to the tech trees, you can't actually do anything in the tech trees until you have built specific buildings. And so I'm going to build this one just because we know we're going to be recruiting a bunch of people in this area, and it's good to get that building built. You can also build this one at the beginning. There are a few other options, but they don't really become available until you get up to level 2. So if you want to get your tech rolling, this is a good building to start. So if we take a look at the actual tech tree here, you'll see we've got ferocious plans, devious plans, ruthless plans, virulent plans, monstrous plans, and then way later you have these other ones as well. At the beginning, if you take a look at ferocious plans, you're going to see a lot of bonuses to clan rats. It is good to get ferocious plans pretty early. I like to unlock this pretty early because you get increased casualty replenishment rate. Devious plans is pretty good, purely because it just reduces your upkeep for Skaven slaves, and often in the early game it's really good to fill armies with them, just to have lots of kind of cannon fodder that just chip down, especially the powerful units of some of the other factions that are nearby. One thing too is Hell Pit is a really quite strong initial zone because it's a single settlement province. So here, if we take a look at the different different commandments available, you got exploitative planning, martial planning, expansionist planning, and efficient planning. So in the early game, using this is pretty good to get increased food, but also expansionist planning is pretty good. So I know in a few turns I'm gonna want to build some more buildings, so I'm gonna go with that to start with. Skaven also have different rights that unlock. You'll see basically you have to actually use the expansionist planning commandment. So this might actually be a better commandment for us to start with, because we can unlock this right, which, if you have a look at this, it gives increased growth, control, and reduces recruitment cost while also generating food. So this can be a really strong commandment, especially in the early game, because it just boosts your faction quite good. And just using the expansionist planning commandment for a single turn will actually allow us to perform this whenever we want. So it's often good to knock that out right at the beginning of the campaign. You can also view Skaven corruption, so you can see Skaven corruption is really only strong here. The higher the Skaven corruption is in a zone, the more control and the more food you generate. But other regions, basically bigger provinces, to have different things. So Skaven corruption is a little bit different than like chaos corruption because it doesn't cause attrition. So just be aware of that. For diplomacy, off the bat, Throt's position is actually relatively good. There are not a lot of particularly strong factions nearby. You know, we're level 100. The nearest group to us is the Great Orthodoxy, and their settlement is kind of down in this direction. And eventually we'll fight with them, but you know, at the beginning they're not particularly a very big threat. So if we take a look at the other factions around us, we're at war with these guys who have these two settlements to start with, and then the other ones that are nearby, you have another Kislev faction, another Kislev faction, more and more Kislev factions. There are also the dwarves up this direction. Dwarves are particularly weak against Skaven factions, especially if you can ambush them. If you can catch them in the open, you can kind of really inflict major damage on a dwarf army with the Skaven. But your units in a head-to-head fight are not going to do as well. So if you don't ambush them, you tend to be at a disadvantage. So one other thing we'll talk about here is you can see that this unit has special augments on it. So this wolf rat unit has instabilities, has augments on it, and this is a function of Throt's flesh laboratory stuff. So what you can do is you can take a look at these different armies or different army units, and then you actually can apply different bonuses to the actual unit. So costs us a certain amount of mutagen in order to do that. I tend to save my mutagen in the early game just because, you know, unlocking some of these things isn't particularly useful. For monster units and infantry units, there's different augments too. So you have Warp Lightning, you have Vanguard deployment, and you have just increased attack. So just be aware that you can augment individual units using your mutagen. We only start with a little bit, so you want to be a little bit careful. You also can upgrade these, but you can see it's like we can't actually do that till the second turn. And so for now, let's just jump ahead a turn here quick, and then we'll go through kind of some additional good strategy at the beginning of this campaign, because Throt's position's pretty good. We've got, you know, this pretty strong province right off the bat. We've got a decent army to start with. We've got a single faction that we're at war with that's quite weak, and we're gonna start kind of punishing them for being weak. If you're relatively new to Total War, the Total War franchise, it's really good to be a bit of a bully in, especially in the early game, in the late game too. But the weaker factions near you are ripe for doing a couple of things. One is just leveling up your lords and really slamming into another faction, beating them up repeatedly can be a really good thing in the early game. You also can just take their settlements. So one of the things we have the ability to do here is we can like loot and occupy this, we can sack it, we can raise it. Normally I would actually start to expand this because I want to build a little bit of a buffer around Hell Pit as I upgrade things. But I'm going to actually expand my Under Empire here, just so we can take a quick look at what that looks like. So we've established an Undercity here now, and so this settlement is still owned by this faction, but we now have the opportunity to build a bunch of different buildings in it. It's really good to build buildings that are cheap, they generate food. You can also, in like really quite good settlements, using different things to like steal a certain percentage of the income. You can steal half of a settlement's income, but it costs you food to do. So there's also the ability to use these subterranean pits, and you can expand. There's just a random chance that when you advance the turn, all of a sudden another Undercity will spawn over here, and you can start to, you know, have them expand out that way. So for now, I'm just going to build one of these just to give a little bit of extra food, and we're going to use Throt. Basically, he's kind of stuck where he is, so there's nothing really nearby that's particularly threatening for him, so not too big of a deal. So in terms of objectives for Throt's campaign, don't start with any missions, but the factions that you want to kill in the short term are the two main Kislev factions. So the Great Orthodoxy, which is down this direction, so you kind of want to start to expand over here, and the Ice Court, which is actually down this direction. So usually with Throt's initial stages of the campaign, you kind of see yourself kind of taking over this area. In the long game, you actually don't really have any specific factions that you have to take over, but there are certain settlements that are important for the Skaven, and if we take a look at them, you know, most of them are kind of down this direction. Even Carrick 8 Peaks is kind of up here. Skaven Blight is all the way over there. The closest one to you is probably Altdorf, which is this direction. So as you go further and further, Galbaraz down this direction. So if you want to get the long campaign victory with Throt, Often people kind of make the little bit of the mistake and they start expanding up in this direction, and really what you should be doing is continually trying to force your way further and further south. And domination victory is the same as it always is. So there are pretty good, it's a pretty good campaign with Throt. You have a lot of options, especially in the early game, but you're gonna fight a lot of Kislev and a lot of Empire, and so getting into the lab and making sure you can actually go through and do a lot of these things is really, really good. So this is a really good thing to take a look at here in the beginning, because we have this harvest organs option, so it gives increased casualty replenishment rate for basically every single monster unit for all of your armies. I pretty much always try to get that right away, because we want to be harvesting organs, and we've still kept ourselves, in the decent level of food. As we continue to fight more battles with Throt, we'll continue to kind of earn more food, because you earn food by fighting battles, taking settlements, and that sort of thing. And you are going to fight a lot of battles in the early game with Throt. Probably the most dangerous enemies to watch out for. You can get attacked by Norska kind of from the north, and they can be kind of annoying to deal with. But the majority of the dangerous factions you'll deal with are kind of down towards the south. You'll deal with Empire, you'll deal with Kislev. Those are the main factions that you'll end up fighting. Eventually you'll get into vampires and other dwarves and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's kind of all I've got for getting started with Throt. If you like the content, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel in the future. Thanks for watching.